The bar was unusually quiet for a Friday night. I sat there, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, watching as the bubbles climbed up lazily from the bottom to the surface. The low hum of conversation, mixed with the occasional clink of glasses, was the only sound that filled the room. Normally, I would have been relaxed, maybe even enjoying the simplicity of it all. But tonight, something was gnawing at me, an unsettling weight that I couldn't shake. It was like a knot in my gut, slowly tightening with every passing minute. I glanced around, taking in the dim lighting, the old jukebox in the corner that had probably seen better days, and the faded wood paneling that made the place feel almost nostalgic. The bartender was wiping down the counter, and a few couples sat at tables, laughing quietly among themselves. I should have felt at ease. This place was a familiar refuge, a spot I came to when I needed to clear my head. But tonight, it wasn't working. Mia. Her name flickered in my mind like a warning bell I was trying to ignore. 7 years of marriage, and yet, lately, it felt like I was living with a stranger. When I first met her, she was a force of nature, beautiful, confident, and had this way of commanding attention without even trying. It was like she could walk into a room and make the whole place feel like it revolved around her. Men would stare, women would envy her. She had that spark, that energy, that made you want to be around her. And I was the lucky guy who got to call her mine. Back then, everything felt easy. We were that couple everyone envied, the one that seemed to have it all figured out. We were building our lives together, chasing dreams, making plans. Mia was deep into her real estate career, and she was damn good at it. She had this natural ability to sell anything, houses, ideas, even herself. And I threw myself into my work, running my construction firm like it was my life's purpose. Long hours, late nights, but it all felt worth it because, in my mind, I was building something for us, for our future. But then something changed. Slowly at first, like a whisper in the background that you can't quite make out. Mia started staying out later. At first it was work-related, client dinners, networking events, real estate showings that supposedly ran long. I didn't think much of it. Hell, I was doing the same sometimes. My job required late nights too. We were both ambitious people. I figured it came with the territory. But then the excuses started piling up. She'd come home well past midnight, her hair freshly done, makeup still perfect, like she hadn't been working at all. When I asked, she'd just smile and say something like, "Oh, you know how these clients are. They want to see every property twice before making a decision." I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious, paranoid husband who questions every little thing. But then there were the missed calls, the sudden trips to the gym at weird hours, the way she'd always seemed to check her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. Every little thing started to feel like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. I tried brushing it off, tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was just overthinking things. After all, we'd been married for 7 years. We had a good life together, a beautiful house, no financial worries, and on the surface, everything looked fine. But it wasn't. Mia had become distant. The way she used to laugh with me, talk with me about her day, even just touch me in passing, it all felt colder, like something had shifted between us. Our conversations were shorter now, more superficial. The intimacy we once had felt like a distant memory, something we used to share but had somehow lost along the way. It was like she was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I didn't have solid proof, no glaring evidence that she was cheating or doing something behind my back, but there was this sinking feeling in my chest that wouldn't go away. Every time I saw her, dressed up for another late night, or caught her glancing at her phone with that faint, secretive smile, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. I took a long sip of my beer, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat, but it didn't ease the tension inside me. I stared at the bubbles rising to the surface, trying to drown out the thoughts racing through my head, but they just kept coming. Why had she changed so much? Was it something I had done? Or maybe something I hadn't done? Was I not enough for her anymore? These questions looped through my mind, each one more painful than the last. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the feeling that something was very, very wrong wouldn't go away. And then, there were the times I'd catch her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Something like guilt, but mixed with frustration. Like she was waiting for me to figure it out, or maybe hoping that I wouldn't. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to sit her down and demand answers, to tell her that I knew something was off, that I could feel the distance between us growing every day. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of me was terrified of what I might find out. The other part, maybe the bigger part, was scared that once the truth came out, there'd be no going back. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So I did what I always did. I buried myself in work, hoping that if I kept busy enough, the nagging doubts would disappear. I convinced myself that maybe it was just a rough patch, that all marriages went through this. But deep down, I knew better. Something had broken between us, and I was too scared to face it head on. As I sat there at the bar, nursing my second drink, I wondered how long I could keep pretending that everything was okay. How long I could keep ignoring the signs that my wife, the woman I had built my life with, was slipping away from me. I tapped my fingers against the cool surface of the bar, watching the bartender shuffle back and forth, pouring drinks for the few scattered patrons. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it and saw Mia's name flash across the screen. "Out with the girls tonight," she had texted earlier. Just one more in a long string of excuses. I let the phone go dark, not bothering to respond. Lately, that's how things had been between us. More silence than conversation, more space than connection. I took a swig of my beer, feeling the bitterness wash down my throat. The door swung open behind me, letting in a gust of cold air, and in walked my friend, Rick. He spotted me immediately, nodding in my direction as he made his way over. "Jack," he said, clapping me on the back before settling onto the stool next to mine. "Man, it's been a minute. You look like you could use a few more of these." He motioned toward my half-empty glass. I forced a smile and signaled the bartender to bring Rick a drink. "Just one of those weeks," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Rick studied me for a moment, his usual grin fading slightly. He'd been my best friend for years, and he had this annoying habit of seeing right through the bullshit. "Yeah? What's going on?" I shrugged, grabbing a handful of peanuts from the dish on the bar and tossing them into my mouth. "Same old stuff. Work's a mess, and Mia's... You know how it is." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Mia's what?" "Just busy," I said, not wanting to dive into it. "You know how real estate is." "Busy, huh?" He took a long sip of his beer, his eyes narrowing a bit as he watched me. "You two been spending any time together? Seems like you're always here when I swing by." I bristled at that, shaking my head. "We've been good. Just working a lot, that's all." Rick leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms out and letting out a low chuckle. Sure. That's what they all say. But Jack, you know I'm here if you need to talk about anything. You guys have always seemed solid, but even the best marriages hit bumps." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again on the counter. This time I grabbed it. A picture had come through from Mia. It was one of those group selfies, her and a couple of women I vaguely recognized, all dressed to the nines, drinks in hand. I stared at the screen for a second longer than I needed to, something about her face in that moment making my stomach twist. "Everything cool?" Rick asked, leaning over to glance at my phone. I pocketed it before he could get a good look, tossing back the rest of my beer. Yeah. Just Mia out with her friends." Rick gave me a long look, but didn't press. Instead, he motioned to the bartender for another round. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, When's the last time you and Mia went out together? Just the two of you? I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. It's been a while, honestly. Every time we try to plan something, something comes up with her job. Or mine. Rick's expression shifted slightly, something between concern and suspicion. You ever think maybe you need to make the time? Sometimes, Jack, when people start getting too comfortable, they let shit slip. I stared into my empty glass, not liking where the conversation was going, but knowing he wasn't wrong. I hadn't even noticed how far apart Mia and I had drifted until recently. And now? Now it felt like I was holding on to a rope that was slowly unraveling, and no matter how tight I gripped, the strands kept slipping through my fingers. You know, Rick continued, leaning in a little closer, sometimes people say they're busy when they're really just avoiding something. I've seen it before. I shot him a glance, my jaw tightening. What the hell are you getting at, Rick? Relax, man. He raised his hands in mock defense. I'm just saying, people don't always say what's really going on. Sometimes it's easier to just let things slide than deal with what's right in front of you. I felt the tension in my shoulders rise, and before I could stop myself, I slammed the glass down on the bar, hard enough to get the bartender's attention. He shot me a look, but went back to cleaning glasses. Rick held up his hands again. Hey, don't bite my head off. I'm just looking out for you. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. Yeah, I know. I'm just stressed. Work, everything. You know how it is. Rick didn't say anything for a moment, just kept watching me with that knowing look of his. After a few more seconds of silence, he gave a nod and drained the rest of his beer. All right, man, I'll drop it. But if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me. I nodded, grateful for the out, and signaled the bartender for another round. Rick and I shot the breeze for the next hour or so, talking about anything but Mia, and I tried to let the conversation distract me from the gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. It wasn't until Rick got up to leave that the heaviness settled back in. He clapped me on the shoulder again before heading out, his voice light but serious. Take care of yourself, Jack, and keep an eye on things at home, all right? I watched him walk out, the door swinging shut behind him. I sat there alone for a while, nursing my beer and staring at the screen of my phone again, the picture of Mia and her friends taunting me. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that the late nights, the sudden changes in behavior were all just part of her job. But something was nagging at me, like a whisper in the back of my mind telling me I was missing something obvious. The bartender came over, wiping down the counter in front of me. You need anything else? I shook my head, tossing a few bills down before standing up. Nah, I'm good. Thanks. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. I stuffed my hands into my jacket pockets, my breath fogging up in the crisp air, and started the walk home. Each step felt heavier than the last. I stepped into the house, kicking off my shoes by the door and letting out a long breath. The place was dark except for the faint glow coming from the kitchen. Mia wasn't home yet, which wasn't surprising. I could still picture the selfie she'd sent me earlier, all dolled up and out with her friends. Or at least that's what she wanted me to believe. The knot in my stomach tightened again, and without thinking, I headed for the liquor cabinet. Grabbing a bottle of whiskey, I poured myself a glass, the liquid sloshing slightly as I downed half of it in one go. I stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the counter, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Everything felt wrong. There was an emptiness in the air, the kind that made it hard to breathe. I pulled out my phone and stared at Mia's last message. Something wasn't adding up. The hours, the excuses, the way she smiled at her phone, more than she smiled at me. I wasn't a fool. My gut was telling me that something was going on, something she wasn't telling me, and I'd had enough of pretending everything was fine. Grabbing my jacket, I headed out the door, the cool night air hitting me as I pulled out my phone again. I opened the tracker app I'd installed on her car a few weeks ago. I hated myself for it, but I needed to know. I needed to stop feeling like I was the one going crazy. The blinking dot appeared on the screen, showing her location across town, but she wasn't at some fancy bar or restaurant like she usually claimed on nights like these. No, this time, the app was telling me she was in a residential area, a quiet neighborhood I didn't recognize. I stared at the map for a few seconds, my heart pounding in my chest, then stuffed my phone back into my pocket and got in my truck. It was a short drive, but every minute felt like an eternity. I kept glancing at the screen, making sure the dot hadn't moved. It hadn't. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were turning white. When I finally pulled up to the address, it was just an ordinary house. The lights were dim inside, and there was another car parked in the driveway. Definitely not one of Mia's friends. I parked down the street and killed the engine, sitting there in the dark for a few moments, staring at the house. This was it. The moment I had been dreading, but also the moment I knew was coming. My mind was racing, a million scenarios flashing through my head, none of them good. I got out of the truck, trying to keep my footsteps light as I approached the house. The night was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I crept up to the side window, peeking through a small crack in the curtains. The living room was empty, but voices were coming from upstairs. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could hear Mia's laugh. Зрение, мягкий и игривый, перемешивающийся с глубоким голосом мужчины. A fire lit in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I was moving around to the back of the house. I found a sliding glass door slightly ajar, like they hadn't bothered to lock it, not expecting anyone to show up. I slipped inside, the cool tile floor chilling my bare feet as I stepped cautiously into the kitchen. Their voices were clearer now. I could hear them talking, laughing. I followed the sound up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. My heart was pounding in my ears, my breath shallow. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear the creaking of a bed. My stomach dropped. I stood outside the closed bedroom door, every fiber of my being screaming at me to turn back, to walk away before I saw something I could never unsee. But I couldn't. I had to know. I shoved the door open without thinking, the handle slamming against the wall. There they were, Mia and some guy, tangled in the sheets, completely caught off guard by my sudden entrance. Her eyes widened in shock, mouth open like she was about to say something, but no words came out. The man, whoever the hell he was, scrambled to cover himself, but it was too late. The image was seared into my mind. Mia, naked in another man's bed, the evidence of her betrayal right in front of me. For a moment, none of us moved. The silence was deafening. Mia's face went pale as she clutched the sheets to her chest, trying to cover herself, but there was no covering up what she'd done. "Jack," she started, her voice barely a whisper, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and flat. I wasn't sure if it was rage or shock that was keeping me calm, but I could feel something boiling underneath the surface, threatening to explode. I took a step toward the bed, glaring at the guy who was now frozen, looking like he wanted to melt into the mattress and disappear. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice low but steady. I wasn't even looking at her anymore. My eyes were locked on him, on the coward sitting in my wife's bed like he hadn't just destroyed everything. "Jack, please," Mia stammered, but I wasn't listening. I grabbed the guy by the collar, yanking him out of bed and slamming him against the wall so hard the picture frames rattled. His eyes went wide with fear, hands raised in surrender. "Who the fuck are you?" I growled, shoving him again. I'm sorry, man," he stammered, shaking. "I didn't know." "Didn't know what? That she was married? That she was my wife?" I slammed him against the wall again, and he yelped, his legs barely supporting him. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Jack, stop!" Mia screamed, scrambling out of the bed and pulling at my arm. "It's not his fault." I turned to her, the woman I had loved, trusted, shared my life with. Standing there wrapped in a sheet like that was enough to shield her from what she had done. Not his fault? I spat, letting go of the guy and rounding on her. You think that makes this any better? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like she hadn't expected me to fight back. I stood there, panting, my hands still clenched into fists at my sides, adrenaline coursing through me like a live wire. Mia stood a few feet away, trembling, wrapped in the sheet that barely covered her shame. The guy, still against the wall, stared at me like he was hoping I'd disappear, like this would all just blow over. But it wouldn't. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, feel the weight of everything crashing down around me. Mia looked like she wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Her lips parted, her eyes wide with fear, but I wasn't interested in hearing whatever pathetic excuse she was about to offer. You need to get the fuck out of here, I growled, my voice steady, but barely. I wasn't sure who I was talking to at that point. Her, him, or maybe both. The guy moved first, scrambling to pull on his pants, stumbling as he tried to gather his clothes. Look, man, I didn't know she was married. I swear I didn't. Shut up, I snapped, not even looking at him. Get your shit and get out. He didn't argue. In a panicked flurry, he yanked on his shoes and darted toward the door like a scared animal. I didn't even watch him leave. My eyes were locked on Mia, the woman I had built my life with, the woman who had just ripped it apart in a matter of seconds. I heard the front door slam shut behind him, but the tension in the room didn't ease. Mia stood there, frozen, her eyes darting between me and the floor like she didn't know where to look. Jack, she finally whispered, her voice breaking. Please, it's not what you think. I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound that echoed through the room. Not what I think? Mia, I just walked in on you fucking some other guy. What the hell? Do you mean it's not what I think? Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks, but it didn't move me. Not anymore. Maybe a few months ago, I would have believed her. Maybe I would have wanted to comfort her, to make sense of whatever bullshit was coming out of her mouth. But not now. Not after this. I'm sorry, she choked out, her voice shaking. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to… Stop. I held up a hand, silencing her. I don't want to hear your excuses. She wiped at her eyes, the sheet slipping slightly as she tried to hold it together, both physically and emotionally. I didn't mean to hurt you, Jack. You have to believe me. I didn't want things to get like this. I don't know what happened. It just started, and I couldn't stop. I shook my head, feeling the sting of her words, but too numb to react. How long, Mia? How long have you been screwing around behind my back? She hesitated, and in that moment of silence, I felt something inside me break. The part of me that had still been holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a one-time mistake. But the way her eyes dropped to the floor told me everything I needed to know. Mia, I said, my voice cold. How? Long? Her lips trembled as she whispered, a few months. Months. Months of lying, of betrayal, of coming home to me, pretending like everything was fine while she was sleeping with someone else. I felt sick, my stomach twisting into knots as the full weight of it hit me. I turned away from her, unable to look at her face any longer. My hands were still shaking, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. How had we gotten here? How had I been so blind? I gripped the edge of the dresser, knuckles white, trying to steady myself. I don't know what to say, Mia said behind me, her voice small, almost childlike. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you, Jack. I swear I do. But things between us, they've just been so distant. I didn't know how to fix it. I spun around to face her, fury bubbling up inside me again. So your solution was to fuck another guy? That's how you fix it? She flinched at the harshness of my words, and for a moment I thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. But then she did something I didn't expect. She straightened up, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was ready to shift the blame. You haven't been here, she said, her voice gaining a bitter edge. You're always working, always out late, always putting the business first. I tried, Jack, I really did. But you've been so distant. I felt like I didn't even exist to you anymore. I stared at her in disbelief. So this is my fault? You're blaming me for this? I'm not blaming you, she shot back, but her tone was defensive now. But what did you expect? I've been lonely, Jack. You weren't there, and Brad, he was. I froze. Brad? She paled instantly, realizing her mistake. You've been sleeping with Brad? I took a step closer, my voice low and dangerous. You've been screwing my best friend this whole time? Her eyes widened, the fear creeping back in. Jack, please. I let out a cold, bitter laugh. The irony was almost too much to bear. Brad, my best friend. The guy I trusted more than anyone, the one who'd been there for me through everything, the one I'd never suspected. And here he was, screwing my wife behind my back, laughing at me the whole time. I clenched my fists again, the anger boiling over. I wanted to hit something, anything. I wanted to break everything in this room, to destroy the life we'd built because it was already in ruins. But instead, I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to control the rage coursing through me. Mia took a step toward me, reaching out like she was going to touch my arm, but I pulled away. Don't. You've done enough. Jack, I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face again. I'm so sorry. I didn't want it to end like this. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since I'd walked in. This woman, the one I thought I knew, was a stranger to me now. Someone who had betrayed everything we'd built together, everything I thought we had. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, the floorboards creaking under my weight as I made my way down the stairs. Mia called after me, her voice desperate and pleading, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I reached the front door, I paused for a moment, my hand on the doorknob. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, the life we'd shared crumbling beneath it. But there was no going back now. There was no fixing this. I opened the door and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, trying to steady myself. Then, without looking back, I walked to my truck and drove away. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't be there anymore. The gas engine roared as I sped down the dark, empty streets, the headlights cutting through the night. The further I got from the house, from Mia, the less suffocating it felt. But the rage? That wasn't fading. It pounded in my chest, boiled in my veins, mixing with the deep sense of betrayal. Brad, my best fucking friend. How the hell had I been so blind? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I was driving fast, too fast, but I didn't care. The whiskey from earlier was still burning in my gut, fueling the fire. I just needed to get away, to think, to process what had just happened. How could she? How could he? I thought back to all the times I'd hung out with Brad over the last few months. He'd been over at the house, drinking beers, laughing like nothing was wrong. We'd watched games together, shot the shit like we always did. The whole time, he'd been sleeping with Mia. The whole fucking time. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there. The late nights, the excuses, the sudden distance between me and Mia. But I never thought Brad would be the one. I trusted him like a brother. We'd been through so much together. College, bad breakups, job changes, everything. And he'd been stabbing me in the back for months, smiling in my face while he fucked my wife. I hit the steering wheel with my fist, the sharp pain shooting up my arm, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was going to make this better. Nothing could fix the mess they'd made of my life. I wasn't sure where I was heading, but I kept driving, needing to put more distance between me and the wreckage that was my marriage. Eventually, the road brought me to the edge of town, to a bar we used to go to back in the day. It wasn't anything fancy, just a hole-in-the-wall kind of place with old neon signs and a parking lot full of beat-up trucks. Perfect. I parked the truck and killed the engine, sitting there for a moment, letting the silence fill the cab. The rage was still there, but it had dulled into something colder, sharper. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face what was left of my life. With a grunt, I stepped out of the truck, the cold night air biting at my skin. The sound of muffled country music leaked out from the bar as I pushed through the door. Inside, it was dimly lit, the faint smell of cigarette smoke still lingering, despite the smoking ban. A few locals were scattered around, nursing their drinks and minding their own business. Good. I didn't need to talk to anyone. I just needed another drink. I slid onto a stool at the bar, catching the bartender's eye. "Whiskey," I said, my voice rough. The bartender, a guy who looked like he'd seen more than his fair share of broken souls, nodded without a word and poured me a generous glass. I took it without hesitation, downing half of it in one go. The burn felt good. It was grounding, something solid in a night that had gone completely off the rails. I stared at the glass for a moment, my mind replaying everything over and over again. The image of Mia, wrapped in that damn sheet, her eyes wide with guilt. Brad, scrambling to pull on his clothes, looking like the piece of shit coward he was. I'd been a fool. A fucking fool to trust either of them. "Rough night?" the bartender asked, leaning against the bar as he wiped down a glass. His voice was low, gruff, but not unkind. I gave a short laugh, shaking my head. You could say that. He didn't press, just gave a knowing nod and went back to his work. That was one thing I liked about places like this. Nobody cared who you were or why you were here. They just let you drink in peace. I took another swig of whiskey, feeling it settle in my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. It was probably Mia trying to call me, trying to explain. Or maybe it was Brad. The thought of that made my blood boil again, but I shoved it down. I wasn't ready to deal with either of them. Not tonight. As the whiskey warmed me from the inside, my mind started to wander. I thought about what Rick had said earlier, about how people let things slip when they got too comfortable. He'd seen it coming before I did, and I'd brushed it off. "You weren't there, Jack. You were too focused on work." Mia's words echoed in my head, but they didn't land. They felt hollow. Maybe I had been distant. Maybe I'd thrown myself into my work too much. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. There were other ways to fix a marriage, to bridge the gaps. But screwing my best friend? That wasn't one of them. I glanced around the bar, taking in the worn-out booths and the few patrons hunched over their drinks. A jukebox in the corner played a slow country song about heartbreak. Fitting. I wasn't sure how long I'd been sitting there, but the anger hadn't cooled. If anything, it was simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. And that moment came quicker than I expected. The door swung open, and in walked Brad. Of all the places he could have gone, he chose this one. He spotted me immediately, freezing in the doorway for a split second before walking over. His face was pale, and he looked like a man who had already realized how badly he'd fucked up. "Jack," he said quietly, stopping a few feet from me, "we need to talk." I stared at him, my grip tightening around the glass. He looked like he wanted to apologize, to explain himself, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He shifted nervously, glancing around the bar like he wasn't sure if he should sit down or keep standing. "I didn't know you'd be here, man. I wanted to talk. About Mia." The mention of her name sent a fresh wave of fury through me. I stood up slowly, the stool scraping against the floor as I did. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "You want to talk about Mia?" I took a step toward him, my chest heaving. "You want to talk about how you've been fucking my wife for months, behind my back?" Brad held up his hands, his eyes wide. "Look, Jack, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It got out of control." I lunged at him before he could say another word, shoving him hard against the bar. The few patrons in the place turned to watch, but no one moved to stop us. Brad stumbled, barely catching himself before looking up at me with genuine fear in his eyes. "You think sorry is gonna fix this?" I snarled, my fist itching to connect with his face. "You think saying you didn't mean for it to happen makes any of this okay?" Brad swallowed hard, his back pressed against the bar. "Jack, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. But I didn't let him finish. My fist swung before I could stop it, landing square on his jaw with a sickening thud. He staggered back, clutching his face, but I wasn't done. Years of friendship, of trust, all shattered in that moment. The betrayal was too much to bear. He held his hands up again, blood dripping from his lip. "Jack, please." But I wasn't hearing it. All I could see was red. I swung again, harder this time, knocking him to the floor. He didn't fight back, didn't even try to defend himself. Maybe he knew he deserved it. Maybe he was too scared to even try. I stood over him, breathing hard, my fists clenched at my sides. "Get the fuck out of my life, Brad," I growled. "And if I ever see you near me, or her, again, I'll finish this." Brad didn't say a word. He wiped the blood from his mouth, gave a small, shaky nod, and scrambled to his feet. He limped toward the door without another look, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a long moment, the bar deathly quiet around me. My chest heaved, my fists still throbbing from the impact. But the anger? That was still there, burning bright. The bar was silent after Brad left, the tension hanging in the air like thick smoke. I could feel every eye in the place on me, but I didn't care. My knuckles ached, and the adrenaline was still pulsing through my veins, but it wasn't enough. It didn't feel like enough. Hitting Brad had felt good in the moment, satisfying even, but it hadn't come close to easing the rage that had been building inside me for hours. I sat back down at the bar, ignoring the looks from the other patrons, and waved the bartender over for another drink. He glanced at my still full whiskey glass but didn't say anything, just poured me another one and set the bottle down. I guess he'd seen worse. I wrapped my hand around the glass, staring into the amber liquid, my mind racing. The cold, hard reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. I'd just knocked out my best friend. My wife, my ex-wife, I corrected myself, had been sleeping with him for months. My marriage, my trust, my life, it had all been a lie. I knocked back the whiskey in one swift motion, the burn in my throat barely registering anymore. The bartender gave me a glance, maybe expecting me to say something or fall apart, but I just stared at the glass, waiting for the numbness to come. It didn't. The door creaked open behind me, but I didn't bother turning around. The last thing I needed was more company. But the footsteps that followed weren't slow or uncertain. They were deliberate. I heard the faintest shuffle as someone slid into the stool next to me, and then a low voice broke the silence. "Rough night?" I didn't look up. "You could say that." She ordered a drink, vodka, straight, without saying another word. When her glass arrived, she picked it up slowly, swirling it in her hand before taking a sip. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, just enough to take in the sharp curve of her jaw, the loose curls falling over her shoulders and the dark eyeliner that gave her eyes a piercing intensity. She was dressed in all black, jeans and a fitted leather jacket, the kind of look that suggested she wasn't afraid of anything or anyone. Definitely not a regular here. Whatever you did, I'm guessing it's not working. She tilted her glass toward my whiskey, her lips curling into a faint smirk. I grunted, more amused than I wanted to admit. You could say that too. She took another sip, studying me for a second before setting her glass down. So, are you going to talk about it, or do you plan on drinking yourself to death first? I turned to her fully, raising an eyebrow. Who says I want to talk about it? She leaned back slightly, crossing her legs. Fair enough. But, judging by the way you just took down half that bottle, I'm guessing it's not exactly something you can ignore. She shrugged, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. Plus, you're sitting in a dive bar alone, kind of screams I need a distraction. I couldn't argue with that. What about you? I shot back. Sitting here all alone. What's your story? She chuckled softly. Fair enough, but I asked first. I sighed, leaning forward with my elbows on the bar, running a hand through my hair. My wife's been cheating on me, for months, with my best friend. Her expression didn't change, though I noticed the slight twitch in her fingers as she swirled her drink again. Damn, that's rough. So what's the plan? You just punched the guy and stormed out, and now you're here? Pretty much. I paused, then added, the best friend part came out tonight. I walked in on her with someone else earlier, a guy I didn't even know. Guess that's how I found out. She let out a low whistle. Double betrayal, that's a tough hand to play. I glanced at her, trying to gauge if she was just humoring me or if she actually gave a damn. But there was something in the way she looked at me, something sharp and focused, like she understood exactly what I was feeling. You seem to be taking this pretty well. Her smirk returned, but this time it was darker, more cynical. Trust me, I've been there. Maybe not the same situation, but close enough. Guys like your friend, they're everywhere, and they'll smile in your face the whole time. I nodded slowly, her words hitting a little too close to home. You know, I didn't think it was possible for two people to lie so smoothly for so long. The whole time, I thought it was just a rough patch. I never even saw it coming. She took a long sip of her vodka, her gaze drifting for a moment. That's the thing about people who lie like that. They're good at it. They make you believe whatever they want you to believe until it's too late. And then, when the truth hits, it's like a truck you never saw coming. Yeah, I exhaled sharply. Exactly like that. She finished her drink, setting the glass down with a soft thud. So what now? You go back home? Confront her? Try to salvage what's left of your marriage? I laughed, shaking my head. Salvage? It's over. Done. I'm not sure what I'll do, but going back to her? That's not an option. She watched me for a second longer, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she were weighing her next words. Good. You'd be a fool if you did. There was a steel in her voice that caught me off guard, and I turned to her fully, noticing for the first time the small scar running just above her eyebrow. She noticed me staring and gave a slight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Long story, she said, gesturing to the scar. One of many. I wanted to ask her more, but before I could, she stood up, tossing a few bills onto the bar. Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out, Jack. The mention of my name made me freeze. I hadn't told her who I was, hadn't mentioned it once since she sat down. How do you... She smirked again, pulling a cigarette from her pocket and tucking it behind her ear. Small town. Word gets around. And you're not exactly hard to recognize. Before I could respond, she was already walking toward the door. I watched her go, trying to piece together what had just happened, but before I could chase the thought any further, she glanced over her shoulder, locking eyes with me one last time. By the way, Jack, she said, her voice low, almost teasing. Your wife? She's not done yet. And just like that, she was gone. The door swung shut behind her, leaving me sitting there, my mind spinning. Not done yet? What the hell did that mean? I didn't know, but something about her words sent a chill down my spine. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door she'd just walked through, my drink forgotten. Whoever that woman was, she knew more than she was letting on. And now, after everything that had just happened, I had a sinking feeling that this nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot. The house was dark when I finally pulled into the driveway, headlights casting twisted shadows across the garage. The place looked different now, emptier, colder, like a hollow shell of what used to be home. My fists tightened around the steering wheel, still buzzing from the night's events. Everything had come crashing down, but something about that woman's words at the bar lingered in my head like a warning. Your wife? She's not done yet. What the hell did she mean by that? I cut the engine and sat there for a long moment, staring at the front door. Part of me didn't want to go inside, didn't want to see Mia again, but I couldn't leave things as they were. Not after tonight. I needed closure, even if it wasn't the kind I wanted. Stepping out of the truck, the cold air hit me like a slap to the face, sobering me up from the fog of whiskey and rage. The silence outside felt too still, almost eerie. I trudged up the porch steps, my heart beat loud in my ears as I unlocked the front door. It creaked open, and the dark hallway stretched before me, quiet as a graveyard. I stepped inside, every nerve on edge. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too cold. Something was off. I moved through the hallway, my footsteps soft on the hardwood floor, half expecting Mia to be sitting in the living room, waiting for me with some desperate attempt at an apology. But there was nothing, just empty rooms and shadows. As I reached the living room, I spotted it. A note. It sat there on the coffee table, folded neatly in half with my name scribbled across the front. Jack. My gut tightened. I snatched it up, half afraid of what I'd find inside. Her handwriting was neat, too careful, like she had taken her time, as if this note was supposed to fix everything. Jack, I don't know how to start this. I'm sorry for everything I've done. I know I've hurt you in ways you can't forgive, and I won't ask you to. I've betrayed you, and I know you'll never trust me again. I can't stay here, not after what I've done. I'm leaving. It's the only thing I can think of that makes sense. Please don't try to find me. I'm sorry. Mia. The paper crumpled in my fist as the fury flared up again. She was running. After all of this, she was just going to disappear, leave me to clean up the mess of our life. The sheer cowardice of it made me sick. I threw the note down and stormed through the house, needing to get rid of the last traces of her, her clothes, her things, anything that reminded me of the woman I thought I'd married. But as I reached our bedroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door to the closet was wide open, clothes spilling out onto the floor. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the sight of Mia standing there in front of the closet mirror. She wasn't dressed to leave. No, her hands were trembling, her face pale, and her eyes were wide with terror. She turned toward me, her breath ragged. Jack! Before she could finish, I noticed what she was clutching, a gun. Jesus, Mia, I whispered, taking a step back, my heart racing. What the hell are you doing? I didn't know how to. Her voice was shaky, barely audible. I thought I could run, but it's too late. I can't fix this. I've ruined everything. Panic surged through me. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Put the gun down, Mia. We can talk about this. Her eyes were wild, darting between me and her reflection in the mirror. What's left to talk about, Jack? You hate me. I deserve it. I ruined everything. Mia, listen to me, I said, taking a cautious step forward. You don't have to do this. We can figure it out. You don't need to run, and you sure as hell don't need to do that. Tears streamed down her face, her hands trembling so violently I was afraid the gun would go off by accident. "I've already lost you, Jack. I've lost everything. There's nothing left." I felt a sickening wave of dread crash over me as I realized just how far gone she was. She wasn't thinking clearly. The betrayal, the lies, it had all spiraled out of control, and now she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't come back from. "Mia, please," I said softly, holding my hands up in surrender, trying to keep my voice calm. "We've both made mistakes, but this isn't the way. You don't get to run from this. Put the gun down." Her grip on the weapon tightened, and her eyes filled with a haunting mix of guilt and regret. I don't deserve to keep going after what I did. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with desperation. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to defuse the situation, but I was out of my depth. I didn't know how to handle this. "Look, Mia," I said, taking another cautious step toward her. "You're right. Things between us are broken, but that doesn't mean your life has to end here. We can deal with the fallout. We can both start over, separately, but you can start over. You don't have to do this." Her lips trembled as she choked back a sob. "You'll never forgive me, Jack. I know you won't." I was just a few feet away now, close enough to see the sweat beading on her forehead, the fear in her eyes. "Maybe I won't, Mia, but this isn't about me. This is about you. Don't make a decision you can't take back." For a split second, I thought she was listening. Her hand wavered, and her eyes flickered with hesitation. But then, something dark crossed her face, a final, desperate resolve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Time slowed. I lunged forward, reaching for the gun, but it was too late. The deafening sound of the shot ripped through the air, and the world seemed to stop. Mia crumpled to the floor, the gun slipping from her hand as blood soaked through her shirt. The room felt like it had collapsed in on itself, the walls closing in. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands trembling as I reached for her, pressing down on the wound, trying to stop the blood, trying to undo what had just happened. "Mia!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Stay with me! Stay with me, goddammit!" Her breathing was shallow, her eyes glazing over as she stared up at me. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." "No, no, no!" I pressed harder, my hands slick with blood, but it was no use. The life was draining from her faster than I could stop it. I didn't know how long I sat there, holding her, screaming for help that wouldn't come. The house was silent, except for my ragged breathing and the distant echo of the gunshot still ringing in my ears. Mia was gone. The betrayal, the lies, the shattered trust, it all ended here, in this room, in this moment. I had lost her, in more ways than I ever thought possible.